Hi, everybody. Welcome to the webinar. Looks like we have about 18 people tuned in so far. I imagine we'll get some more here soon. Very excited for you all to be joining me here today. And maybe just a quick question. Where is everybody tuning in from today? If you could put that in the general chat should be in your right-hand window, that would be awesome. Yeah, would love to know where everybody's listening in from, and really happy to have you with us. As a couple just housekeeping things here, first and foremost today, if you are having trouble viewing this webinar or you're having trouble with the audio, couple suggestions. Google Chrome is going to be the best browser for you to use. We typically see the best results for that. That is what Demio, the software we use, recommends. Demio also has a great mobile app too, if you have time to download that, if you're kind of like on the run. So I'd recommend checking that. Demio's mobile app, and that's just D-E-M-I-O, their mobile app. So really, really excited to have you all with us. My name is Sam Jabowski. I'm the Vice President of Sales and Marketing at Brighter Vision. This is the third Fall into Cash webinar out of 4 webinars we have been doing. It's been wonderful holding these webinars with different industry experts, and I hope you'll join us for the series finale webinar next week. I will put details about that in the chat later. If you're a Brighter Vision customer, great to see you again. If you are new to Brighter Vision, our whole goal is making marketing simple for therapists. Whether you are a current customer or new to us, these webinars are for you, and we're so excited to have you with us. If you've been thinking about getting started with Brighter Vision, we are offering $100 off any of our website packages until the end of September with coupon code FIC 2019. As well, we're offering everyone a 14-day free trial of Social Genie, which is our social media management software. It's really cool. Basically enables you to schedule out a year's worth of social media posts in just about 10 to 15 minutes of your time. I am super excited today to be joined by Katie Bruno and Kurt Whittle. Katie and Kurt are both founders of the Therapy Reimagined conference, which Brighter Vision is absolutely thrilled to be attending. Brighter Vision CEO Perry Rosenblum will actually be speaking at the conference, so it's going to be a really cool event for us. They do offer a pretty great discount right now with coupon code, which I'll put in the chat for $50 off. Aside from that, Katie Bruno is a licensed MFT as well as a coach, consultant, and speaker, supporting leaders, visionaries, and helping professionals to create thriving businesses as well as meaningful and sustainable careers. As I mentioned, Katie is the founder or co-founder of Therapy Reimagined Conference. She's also president of the board of directors for CAMP, owner of Evolve to Thrive Counseling, and operates a private practice in Torrance, California. Kurt Whittle is the co-founder of the Therapy Reimagined Conference as well, and co-host of the Modern Therapist Survival Guide podcast. He is on the CAMP board of directors, an adjunct professor at Pepperdine University, and is a former subject matter expert for the California Board of Behavioral Health Sciences. He has a private practice in Los Angeles where he specializes in adolescents and EMDR. So Katie and Kurt, thank you so much for joining us. Absolutely be thrilled to have you be sharing your expertise here today. And yeah, I will let you take the floor.
Thanks, Sam.
Awesome. Thank you, Sam.
So we're calling this The Brand Called You, and let me figure out how to get the next slide. Here we go. There we go. So Kurt, you want to start with the agenda?
So in looking at our profession being about selling what it is to be a therapist, be in therapy, and really working on the idea that we are the agents of change, that we're the ones who bring our knowledge and how this impacts our clients. We're talking about how this converges into not only the work that we do with our clients, but also the business. And we're going to do that by defining how our personal brand works, how we can really embrace who we are, who we really are, the services that we have to offer, how the consequences of having a strong personal brand are going to impact your clients, who your target clients are likely going to be, and what you are going to do with that.
All right. So I think oftentimes when I hear about folks thinking about personal branding, it's kind of like having to deal with the paparazzi. You know, it's not confidential. It's not the blank slate. But I think that the big point that what we're talking about in this webinar and a lot of the stuff that we do is that a personal brand is actually kind of a curated version of yourself that shows what it would be like to be in relationship with you, what it would be like to work with you, kind of showing the humanizing personality traits that would make working with you different from other people. And so it's giving your clients or potential clients a heads up on what it is to be in relationship with you. So that's what a personal brand does. And it's not about showing off, getting too much advertising or that kind of stuff. It's really about humanizing yourself and showing who you are to potential clients.
So who do you think you are? This could be said in a number of different ways, and I am seeing a couple of people have lost audio, so I don't know if Sam or admins have ways of addressing that, but who do you think that you are could be said in a very pejorative way, but when you really embrace the aspects that you bring into a relationship with other people, who you really are does frame a lot of the ideas that clients might have about you. And the better that you can embrace that mission and that vision can help set your clients up for better success just by being able to embrace certain aspects of you.
So why are you a therapist, I think, is the beginning of this. And I think it's something where knowing why you became a therapist, knowing why you continue to do the work is really important, because it oftentimes speaks to a larger mission and vision. It speaks to what it is that you bring to the work that's unique. And I think that the thing that can be very hard is identifying how your story plays in, because many of us have had some sort of childhood trauma or a family member that's had a mental health concern or something, and that often is why we became therapists. And so in looking at what your story is and how you were relatable and that kind of stuff, I think oftentimes what happens is people often will keep all of that hidden because it doesn't align with kind of the old school blank slate idea. And so I think in looking at what your story is, I think it's important to initially start with what is your full story, so you really can have that at your fingertips, and potentially doing the work with your therapist if there's still things to process, and looking at the personal attributes as well that potentially came from your past, as well as the things that make you unique, and kind of really getting down to why am I a therapist? Who am I? I mean, that's kind of a small question, and what is notable about me, so that you can really think about what are you bringing to the table as kind of theoretically a personal brand.
Depending on what your story is, it might really impact who your potential clients are. And for a lot of people who have gotten into this field because of a positive experience as a consumer of therapy, you've been through your own stuff. You know what your story is. You've had to face some very, very difficult emotions. And this is where there might be some level of safety and comfort that you're able to convey to other people as far as how you've come to own your own issues, you've come to own your own work. But that might not necessarily be something that always translates over to clients. Now, I'm a huge proponent of EMDR because I had a phenomenal EMDR experience. And this was really spurred on by, I was in a cycling accident a few years ago and went to traditional therapy, didn't really match for me. But once I tried EMDR, I was able to get through a bunch of feelings that helped me get right back into cycling. This feels like a very safe story. It's contained, it's kind of a unique thing to me, but it speaks to how much I believe in EMDR. This might not necessarily translate out to all sorts of clients, but for people who've gone through a single incident sort of trauma, hearing some sort of success with EMDR really helps to help them see what I believe it is. This might not translate, though, when people who've had a lot more difficult histories. If you've been through years of relationship or other kinds of abuse that other people who are going through those very same issues might be traumatized on, that might be not comfortable for people to see. And they might be taking on that kind of a responsibility to you and not wanting to feel like their responsibility is taking care of their therapist in the sessions. So you also want to make sure that the stories that you're putting out there, as Katie was talking earlier about curating what your content is and curating what your brand is that what you're doing is relevant and coherent with your brand. In working with my practice, a lot of the teenagers that I see, a lot of the work that I do is around families. I'm going to want to project a more wholesome, family-oriented type work than necessarily getting out into a lot of things about sexuality or sex addiction, and really making it more accessible for a lot of the families to see that what I'm doing is in the best interest of family work, not necessarily in promoting what might be seen as promiscuous behaviors. So the choice for you is really to figure out what that story is for you and how to best convey that for your clients to be able to take it on and to see that you're somebody who knows what you're talking about and they know that you know them.
And I think one piece for folks who've had their own trauma, just to kind of reflect on this, is being able to identify, do you tell them the trauma or do you make it clear from the way you talk about it that you understand the perspective? Because I think oftentimes even just having that knowledge can be conveyed in how you write about it, how you talk about it. And so you don't necessarily even have to disclose specific pieces. You can just kind of look at how you kind of talk through those things. So in these spots, we have kind of the building your profile throughout here. Kurt and I are going to just kind of reflect on some of this stuff. And I don't know if do we have all the audio back, Sam? Oh, we lost Sam again.
Yes, it's working just fine on Katie's end. So should be all good. It may just be issues with some folks with a slower connection.
Okay, great. So for folks who are able to hear us and in the audience still, what are the types of things, what are the types of questions that you have about sharing your story or those types of things? Because I think for me, oftentimes what I saw was that it was something where I ended up having, I had to figure out what I wanted to share, because my story is one of having burnout and having kind of, I call it being ejected from a system that wasn't serving me. And so for me, it was about how much am I comfortable to share and how much is really relevant to my clients. And what I came to understand is what's relevant to my clients is that I was in a position of leadership. I continue to have leadership, so that's important to share. And I'm very prone to burnout. And so being able to show how difficult that is and really talk about that, I think that's very helpful. Anna has a question. How do you do that on your website? Do you want to take that one, Kurt?
So I think that this is a great question. And oftentimes this is a lot of clients' first experience with us. And there's a very small but really impactful research pool on the therapeutic relationship is maybe now starting with a Google search rather than in the first sessions. And so being able to convey this understanding on your website is not only a great question of as to how to, but is probably almost necessary in a 21st century digital world. And there's a couple of things that we recommend. One is really taking ownership of the story and being able to talk about the effects that it had on you. My website, where I talk about EMDR, I talk about my bike accident. I talk about feeling different than what I know that I should feel based on the safety around it, and that how traditional therapy didn't help me with that. But once I went through EMDR, those thoughts and those feelings really lined up. Another really great way to do this is we really encourage people to have a video of themselves on their websites and to really get kind of that idea of who you are out there, of spend a few minutes doing a really good video that allows for you to demonstrate who you are. So that way people have a good idea of, oh, this is what I can expect when I go into Anna's office. Anna seems like this kind of a person, and I'm really just going to kind of gel with her because she seems like somebody that I'm going to respond to. So you can do that both through your writing, but also through video is a really great way to do that.
And I think the other part is sharing your story something in session. And I think for pieces of the story, it may be best to kind of take a case-by-case example. I think what I've seen is folks will have, you know, a story that feels like it's available for public consumption. It's something that, and I always talk about the client who is the most impacted by the little quirks, the ones that struggle the most. If they were to read your website, would it impact them? And that's kind of what Kurt talked about earlier. And so for the things that potentially are one-on-one, I think you can definitely, with kind of considering the self-disclosure, you can do that in session versus having that all on the website. So there's different layers and there's different ways that you can do it. Steph says a video intro seems great. What questions might you answer? What might you cover in that video versus in writing? You're welcome, Anna.
So before I answer Steph's question, I do want to point out for any of you who are having to come back and watch this because of audio issues and might have questions that come up through the video, come and join our Facebook group, the Modern Therapist group. You can post the questions there. We're more than happy to answer them. I have no idea how to get back into the videos and to answer anything that you might be asking a little bit later, but I do know that we check out there. But back to Steph's question, what questions might you answer? What might you cover in that video versus in writing? This is where it really is going to be specific, I think, to some of the rest of the things that we're going to cover in this workshop and really looking at the types of clients that you want to see. For me, my practice, if I want teenagers in, I'm really going to be speaking not only to the teens, but also to their parents, as far as, you know, I really want to show that, hey, I've got some energy, I've got some responsiveness, but I can hold a boundary that works within families, and to be able to help everybody feel heard and to be able to move the family system forward. Now, that's not necessarily the same thing that if I'm working with a different population that might need more space to be held and more uncovering of somebody who's going to want to be opening up. And we'll kind of get through some of this stuff. If you don't feel that question's answered, definitely bring this question back up at the end of the webinar today.
And I think just another quick thing, Steph, I find that the video is more of an emotional connection, and it's about kind of who you are, and it in some ways almost doesn't matter exactly what you say, whereas in writing, the language and the voice and the tone of voice are more important. So I think that's one of the distinctions you may want to make. It's just kind of the emotional connection is going to be more available when you're speaking and seeing and that kind of stuff versus writing or copy. So what kind of therapist do you want to be? I think this is something where, especially for folks who are earlier in their careers, there's this idea that either you have to already be there to claim it, or that you have to claim things you don't have already. And I think in truth, we need to kind of honor where we are in our process. And so I really like creating a personal mission statement. And I think it's not just something that is about the business, it's about this calling that you have. Because let's face it, most of us as therapists, we have a calling to serve clients and potentially specific types of clients. So a calling to help people. And so really identifying what that is and how that could show up is important. I think the other thing is, who are you becoming? And what will sustain you? Because if you say, well, I feel like I need to help people, but you're drained all the time by the specific clients you're serving, or you kind of run out of steam on something, you're not going to really be able to maintain it as a calling, as a job. It won't be sustainable, but it also is something that your brand won't really be sticky. You know, like you'll start with something and then you'll go over here and you go over here. And so I think it's doing, again, kind of some of that soul searching to identify, what is it I'm trying to do? What is it I think is important? And really identifying, what are my values? How do I make sure that it's clear what my values are so that clients understand what I'm bringing to the table and also understand how I'm going to be in treatment with them, what they can expect and how I advise them. And so really getting a clear sense of that. And I like to write it down. I think some people like to do more of a kind of just think about it and that kind of stuff. But when you start writing it down, some of that can even turn into website copy or a blog post or or that kind of thing. So I think that's super important to do. And it's kind of, how are you going to move towards that therapist you're going to be 2 years in the future? And and Kurt will talk about kind of what you can claim now, but also kind of planning out the steps to get where you want to go.
So the kind of therapist that you want to be known for might be about the specific kind of training you have. I've brought up EMDR a number of times here, but it's also being known for a number of different things that might be under your control, might not. I get a number of phone calls of, hey, I'm looking for a male therapist for my teenager. Now, this is something that's really easy for me to put out there because it's not a big surprise. I'm a guy. So for families that are looking for that kind of a connection, that's something that I can really lean into and make as a part of my brand, and to really serve as kind of that masculine influence that they might be looking for, especially for their sons. Also knowing this and kind of separating out even from some of the other people who are guys who work with teens is knowing how I work and how I'm going to come across. Now, my biggest competitor is also my suite mate, and his office is literally 3 feet away from me. But we have very, very different ways of what our self-evaluation is and ways that we project ourselves. He's a super lovely guy who everything is wonderful. He's basically the human embodiment of a golden lab. He's a wonderful human being. I, on the other hand, am probably a little bit more pushy, a little bit more cynical, a little bit more sarcastic about things. And this really allows for us to lean into what comes more naturally to us. And this is the way that we present ourselves. Now, we start to get into our ethics codes here a little bit too, and we've listed a bunch of the resources down here. These are the major master's level licenses, ethics codes. We didn't dive into the APA for this, but really what you're projecting needs to respectfully and correctly show what your scope of competence is. And this is where, if you have an emerging part of your practice that you're maybe not fully certified or trained in something, that you're accurately reflecting where you're at in your process. And you also need to make sure that what you're doing is in fact for the patient's benefit, because if you're promising things or if you're self-disclosing things that might not be helpful to the patient, this is where you're going to start running into the very respectful boundaries of where our profession is guided. If you're getting too far out of what you're doing, if you're maybe, speaking to that trauma that you're not quite through all the way, this is where you do have that responsibility to get your own assistance as well. And just based on the way that my screen is, I can't see what this last point is on the slide. So
identity, values, and beliefs, and therapeutic alliance are the last two.
Okay, so this is a great one, because I think that this is something where this is something that can be incredibly negative, which is what we're protecting against, but also can be incredibly positive. And on the last slide, Katie had talked about therapist beliefs. This is something that we are seeing all of the time, all across our field, when it comes to issues like LGBT ideas. And based on the positions that Katie and I are in a lot of leadership things, we see, a lot of protesters around things like sexual orientation change therapies, conversion therapies, that speak to or speak against therapists who are really LGBT friendly. If you're working in relationships and sex therapy, really being able to speak to, are you a sex positive therapist? Are you somebody who's really believing in things confined to monogamous relationships? That either of those are things that, when you start to share what your values are, it helps clients self-select into your practice. So that way they're making an informed decision, and it's not necessarily a bait and switch of what they're going to get once they're there. And that really does come down to your self-awareness of what your beliefs are and how that might impact the work that you do.
So I'm looking at the time, and I know that we're digging deep, but if anyone has questions on this aspect, definitely feel free to put them in the chat and we can circle back around. But I think the piece we're really talking about in this little section is that we need to not just be a blank slate. We need to be able to actually give clients an idea of what it would be like to work with us. because there's so many different perspectives and there's so much bias or kind of perspective that we may bring, and we need to be aware of it. We need to work on it, but definitely we need to make sure that if we're not able to work with a client, or if we're not able to do the things that need to be done with a client, whether it's we don't have the expertise yet or our perspective is just too misaligned, we need to make sure that we're appropriately referring out, or that clients are self-selecting out. Okay, next slide. Who are you really? So talking through your professional and presence and persona. So this one is the typical one that Kurt will talk about.
So this is kind of the resume building things. You can reference what your license status is. And I think that this is really an area where the better that you own what you are, I see a lot of pre-licensees. I'm just an associate. I'm just an intern. That this is even in how you present yourself, that you do have a truth in advertising ethic to follow, but that can really be done in a very positive way. Where you went to school, how many years you've worked, the specialty certifications you have. These are all things that you can just kind of take straight off your resume, put them on your website. But that's not enough. I mean, if I'm going out and I'm searching for a new therapist, knowing that they're an MFT or an LCSW, okay, that's not necessarily going to move the needle for me. That they went to a certain school, state school, university. Okay, if I have maybe an allegiance one way or another, that might move it a little bit for me. How many years that they've worked. I see this all over the place, that some people really like to have new therapists as their therapist because they feel that it's kind of this freshest sort of ideas that are being brought into the field. Some people are just going to seek out somebody who's licensed for 40 years. These are things that you can't really control. The specialties, certifications, that kind of stuff, that speaks more to your education. But when we really look at the way that our field is, if you have a specialty or a certification and somebody else does too, one of you is probably going to use that in a little bit different way than the other. And the more that you can lean into what those differences are and how it works for you, adds to the depth of what you're taking from your resume and putting on your website or putting in your advertising.
Absolutely. And I think the truth in advertising thing is important. But I think what Kurt was starting to dig into is really you need to be able to identify, what do you uniquely bring? What is, in business terms, your unique value proposition? And so I think being able to identify, and Kurt's example earlier of his suite mate who is like a Labrador retriever, and I was thinking like, you're like a house cat.
Absolutely.
I think being able to identify what that is, as well as, it's, I mean, I guess that's kind of very visceral. So I think that goes to the style. It's the very positive, affirming versus the very challenging and still caring, but challenging. And I think it's being able to identify, how do you bring something different? What is it that is uniquely you that someone's going to get from you? So it could be your skills. It could be, it could be the stuff from the previous slide, or it could be your personality. I'm a cheerleader. I'm a very caring therapist, but I'm also pretty directive. So there's a lot of that comes across in my copy, because that's what makes me different. There's a lot of therapists that will sit back and listen. I jump in. So I think it's important that my clients know that. And I think that's something that a lot of my clients are asking for. They know my opinion. They're going to understand from my online presence, my website, and all of the things that I've created, that I'm going to be up front and be a person in the room. And some clients don't want that, but the clients who do have told me that it's so refreshing, and that's why they're my clients versus someone else. So I think it's important to identify what makes you unique. And one way to do this is to kind of ask the people around you, how would you describe me? What are some words that describe me? How do your clients describe you? I think my clients have told me, Katie, you're a person. So, okay, that's helpful when I get more context around it. How does your competitor describe you? So Kurt's suite mate hopefully knows exactly what he keeps saying about him, so that he can use that to really help to present himself accurately. And I think the special skills or personality traits, you may have special skills that you don't want to share. And so I think it's also make sure that you're comfortable to share them in order to do so. Oops, I think I did something different. Does it still look okay, Kurt?
It just got smaller, but.
Okay, let me go back. There we go. Okay, like, what did I do? There we go. All right, so the other thing is your presence. And I think oftentimes when people think about themselves, they see their whole selves. And I'm sure we talk about this with our clients, but think about this for yourself as well. There's the public facing person, and then there's the person that's at a party, the person that's not feeling well and laying on the couch. I think you don't need to be so authentic that you're sharing all the dirty laundry. It's about who are you at your best and what is your personality in the room. Now, there's going to be, you may shift that a little bit client to client if you're adaptable and empathic like me. Kurt always jokes that he can tell how I'm going to start speaking based on our interview, because I constantly am doing all the mirroring and using the same language and that kind of stuff. So don't do that on your website, or maybe for your ideal client. But it's also really identifying what, kind of at your best, what is your personality in the room? How do you speak? I know there's a lot of folks when they do their marketing copy will write in a very professional way, like they're writing a research paper. And I think it's really important to use your authentic voice. If you are, if you speak very well and have good grammar, write that way. But for me, I'm very informal. And so I have on my website incomplete sentences. I know it's crazy, but I have incomplete sentences. I have contractions. I have all of these things to really make it sound like a conversational tone. And I think it's important to do that in an authentic way, not grabbing someone else's irreverent tone, but actually using your own voice in order to really show people who you are.
And really what this is speaking to is a certain level of, you don't want to have the kind of writing that conveys something that you're not. You don't want to put the stereotypical therapist lingo of, I'm going to create all of this space, if you're not the kind of therapist who's going to create that kind of space. And this is being able to communicate that specialness in a way that is truthful about who you are. I am not going to put pictures of silhouettes and yoga on my website, because I'm not that kind of therapist. And I have a really clear basis for why I say that, is because in the way that I work, I don't want to sell people on something that I'm not going to provide them. That what they're expecting is somebody to do yoga and do, beachy type flowery things. They can go someplace else, because I want to make sure that when they come into the office, they know what they're going to expect on my end. And this is really speaking to, as professionals, the public has an inherent trust with us, but as therapists, as professionals, we're really good at talking to other therapists. And a lot of times we can fall into the language that is just conveyed in our professional circles. And so when we start talking about what makes therapy work and what people can expect from therapy, a lot of us get kind of lost of what it's like to talk to people who may not have the experience of mental health services, that as they're looking at your website, as they're hearing you speak, that really makes it understandable and digestible for them. And as that language is really something that works out, this is things that you can even self-disclose in some certain ways without necessarily getting into your deep history. And a really good example that I've heard of this is a therapist who's in sobriety recovery for several years, without saying, I've been sober for 15 years, put in the language on her website of, these are the kinds of things that we experience when we go to 12-step meetings. And this is the kinds of things that we would hope that our therapists understand. And these are the kinds of services that I'm able to provide knowing that. And so it's really communicating in a way to people who are facing issues of addiction and substance use that lets them know, hey, I've got this little nudge of something that I can speak to that other people don't. And so this communicates that specialness without necessarily even having to be in your face about it.
Yeah, and I think you can also say, I've been in recovery for 15 years. I think it's something where you have to make that decision, but I think it's definitely important to make sure that you're communicating clearly to the audience, whatever that means. And so as far as building your profile in this situation, I think it's really making sure that you kind of, I again go to writing this down, and we have a link later in the PowerPoint with a workbook that goes through this step by step, and so that will be shared at the end. And it's more in depth. It comes from a 6-hour workshop that we did that really goes deep into each of these things. But I think in looking at the professional persona and presence, I think it's making sure that you do recognize what training you've done, that you do make sure that you have, kind of that you understand the marketing and advertising rules of your profession, and whether or not you need to list a supervisor or kind of how you put your license down. But I think it's also getting really clear on the persona and the way that people view you, and even trying to use the language that clients use. I've seen websites that talk about attachment, or about, kind of, I use CBT, which I think people know, and XYZ and ABC. And I think it's something where if you're marketing to other therapists, that's fine, because sometimes you are a second or third referral. But if the people that you're marketing to are in a different field, they're not going to know, and they're not going to use the same language. And so I think it's really getting a very clear sense. And I've actually had clients just pay attention to their therapy clients on how they talk, how they describe the therapy, how they describe the therapist, and make sure you write that stuff down. Now, if it's a specific word that a client uses and nobody else uses that word, okay, don't use that in your marketing copy. But if it's something where you get repeatedly over and over again, you're a real person, Katie, you're a real person, that's something I'm going to put in my marketing copy, because it's clearly what is resonating from those things. So any other final thoughts on this one, Kurt, before we move on?
Nope.
All right. What do you have to offer? Benefits and outcomes, as well as your plan. So I think this next one is yours. Yeah, this is yours, Kurt.
So we know that what makes therapy work is that therapeutic relationship. And I'm a big fan of Bruce Wampold's The Common Factors theory around what makes therapy work, and really being able to identify down that into 3 pieces. The therapeutic relationship is therapist and the client both know the goals that they're working towards. They agree on how they're going to get there, and they are both happy with how they are doing those first 2 things. Now, these are things that you've heard about probably a number of times in your career at this point, but it's that second piece that I think often gets trained out of therapists, because then we're told, go to this model of therapy, do CBT, do ACT, do DBT, do EMDR, that gets lost in the shuffle. And so this is really where we should be identifying, even within our own practices, of the general treatment outcomes that we get. And this comes from developing a data around how successful are you actually with clients. Mm-hmm. And this is something where it should be done very, very neutrally, very qualitatively. But when you really start looking at who's coming to you at your practice, of being able to say, I'm able to see clients through the end of their goals that they identify at the beginning of therapy 85% of the time when I use EMDR, is something where it doesn't necessarily speak to the individual aspects of any particular client who's coming in. You're still keeping those confidential ideas there, but it does show you, A, when you are successful, how you can convey that, and B, if you're not successful, things that you might need to adjust on the clinical end of helping you to be able to get there more successfully. And so this kind of data and outcome is also something that you can put on your website that really does show, hey, not only do I think I'm effective, but I have some proof about it. And I'm willing to look at myself in this process. And that is something that clients are really wanting to respond to, and especially entering into services maybe for the first time, of wanting to know that it's somebody who's effective and somebody who's got the proof that they're effective, and isn't just putting something out there that might be a false promise or a hope.
And to the last point, which is neutralized case studies, I think people, especially I think in the decreasing of mental health stigma and the increase of knowledge and availability, people are going to want to know what it's like to work with you and what kind of results you get. And so I think what the stuff that you're talking about, Kurt, that I really like is potentially, you know, Scott Miller's feedback-informed treatment and actually having data on your own efficacy. But I think if you don't do that, or if you haven't done that yet, I think being able, and a neutralized case study is really not about a person. It's about, you know, it's kind of the way that you talked about the general treatment outcomes, but you can talk about generally how clients enter, like how they enter and how they leave. And to kind of take that further, I think it's something where there are folks who exactly know what therapy is, and they have a great idea about what it is, but a lot of people don't know that. And so the more that you can walk them through, and this is something that's more of a sales tactic. So, you know, I'm sorry if you're feeling a little dirty right now, but if people don't know what the steps are and how to do it, they're not going to necessarily take action. If you have a website that kind of, you know, there's a little contact button, but it doesn't talk through how you work from start to finish, you know, kind of aligned with these case studies or these outcomes so they know what they can expect, they're not going to take action. And so looking at, this is what you can expect at the intake. This is how you make your first call. These are the paperwork requirements that how I'm going to send it to you. This is what treatment typically is. Some of that would be in session, of course, but a lot of it can end up being in your website, like on your website or within your first, you know, the first stages of your process, in order to make sure that people know what to do and that they know what to expect. Because I think that takes away a lot of the anxiety. I mean, if we think about when people are coming to your website, there is most likely a lot of pain and desperation and confusion and sadness and lack of motivation. And so I think it's important to guide them through, because the strongest types of websites or brands, and this comes from kind of Story Brand is the book, and I think we have it listed somewhere. If not, we'll figure out where we can give you guys that information, maybe in the Modern Therapist group on Facebook. But if you can kind of describe them, and that's, I think, our next section, and then also how you walk them through this process with you as a guide, it's very important. And I think a lot of therapists put more about themselves on their website than they do about their client and what the client can expect. And that's a problem. It should be 80% who your client is and how you treat them, not the previous section where we're talking about who you are. And so I think it's kind of saying, this is the problem that you've had. I see you, I can identify it. These are the steps that you're going to take. These are the things that I bring to the table. That's the about you part. And this is the plans that we typically make and the goals we typically receive. And I think showing them what's at stake can be a very helpful thing too. It can provide hope, but it can also remind them that if they don't take action, things won't change. And so I think it's being able to really help with kind of the motivation for them to actually take the first step of sending you an email or scheduling an intake appointment or calling you, that I think if they have a clear sense of what it looks like, they'll be able to do that better. And
these are a number of the ethics codes that we've been referring to throughout here. But to add to Katie's point on this is that think about it from your own perspective of seeking out a therapist. That if you're going to somebody's website, are you looking at what their resume is, or are you looking at how they make you feel in the way that they write? And I think that that's the same kind of feeling that you want to convey to potential clients, regardless of what their previous experience is with mental health. If they're really well seasoned, have seen a number of other therapists before, you're probably not needing to convince them to come into therapy. What you're needing to convince them of is why you. And this is really where that truth in advertising isn't just about listing what's on your resume. It's about being able to fill in the colors of a qualitative, intangible aspect that really is something that embraces who you are and how you work. And I think the only thing that we haven't really explicitly talked about here is not guaranteeing results. And, I think some of us might sometimes lean into the science or outcome studies of other people and say, CBT works in 15 to 20 sessions or whatever it might be. But really being able to speak to, I use CBT, which has an evidence base to work in shorter term chunks to address very concrete goals. It's a really good way of speaking to the effectiveness of it without guaranteeing that results are necessarily going to happen.
kind of the results may vary, but this is what I use, and this is the typical efficacy. So as far as your offerings, I think, Kurt, you can jump in, but I think the biggest piece is actually let people know how things work and what you do, what they might expect. But the bumpers are, don't talk about something that you're not really skilled to do, and don't guarantee results. Did I catch all of it?
Absolutely.
And if anybody has any questions, please feel free to jump into the chat and ask the questions. We can stop in the meantime. But we got a little behind, so I want to move forward. So a therapist walks into the room, consequences of a strong personal brand. So I think this is yours.
Yes. So this is something where consequences are all over the place on this. They can be very, very positive. They can be to maybe the concerning side. But one of the absolute best things that can happen is clients are going to self-select to you for a better match. When we go back to that therapeutic relationship, if they walk in the door and you walk in the door with the idea that you're going to be able to help them, that really speaks to those first two aspects of the therapeutic relationship. If you're attracting clients that are going to resonate with you, chances are they're going to resonate with you. And the inverse of that is also true. If you have people coming in who aren't going to match well with you, chances are it's going to be a ton more work in order to get to effectiveness, and clients might not have the patience for that to happen. If you were going kind of on this traditional idea of 3 sessions to establish rapport, if we can have a lot stronger basis of that in session 1 or 2, then clients are going to be able to start feeling the work happening a lot sooner. They're going to be a lot happier with the results, which leads to more referrals to you in the future.
Yes. But
if they're not matching with you, if you're getting clients that, I'll be honest, I'm not a great couples therapist. I just, and I'm okay owning that, because I'm not very effective with a lot of couples. And so for couples to come in, if I'm the only experience of that, of their seeking out services, they're not only going to blame me, but they're going to blame couples therapy in general. And that doesn't do any of us any favors. So I want them to self-select to good couples therapists. That connection before you enter the room, this can be your website, this can be your waiting room. My office is very much set up to be teenage friendly. I might be the only therapist that I know of who has orange walls in my office. And it's because I really do want to set an idea of I've got this energy, I've got kind of this differentness factor to me, and that's what's going to be effective there. And this is being able to really show that the expectations and the hope that clients bring in can be met. And the more that I can convey that earlier on, the better.
Victoria said, interesting, I use Christian counseling. I'm very open and I explain what I have gone through, which goes with what they have gone through. Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I think it's something where being able to talk through what you've done and kind of setting a tone can really have the right people in the room with you. So this is also yours, Kurt.
So, too much of a good thing. This speaks a little bit more to the negative end of pitfalls that might happen. If you self-disclose too much, potential clients might think, oh, you're just talking too much about yourself. That this is all going to be about you. Katie talked about that 80-20 sort of balance, that if too much of what your website is about you, then they might not feel that they're going to be heard. Clients worrying that they have to take care of you. I mentioned this a little bit earlier, as far as especially in trauma-related aspects, but that doesn't mean that you necessarily have to shy away from things when you're able to convey the process as opposed to just what the story is.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I was going to just say something very quickly of like the lack of client disclosure. I think for me, what I was going to add to that is I have a therapist who I absolutely adore, but I was able to find her religious beliefs. And so there are some things that I don't disclose to her because she has a different belief than I do. And I think, to Victoria's point, being able to make sure that you kind of selected properly can be helpful, because if a client knows that you have very different beliefs, they may not want to offend you. They may not want to kind of share all of them. And I've had clients come to me with that same concern because they had a therapist that didn't line up in that way.
And so to Victoria's point, which I think is phenomenal, if she's advertising herself for Christian counseling, chances are that's going to make people who are seeking Christian counseling look at her more closely than maybe somebody who's not speaking to that. And that's a good thing. Yeah. It also might make it to where some people who are coming from different faiths might look over Victoria and look on for somebody else, which is also a good thing. Because if this is something where, even if it's not something that we intentionally put out into our work, that those values might start to seep into session, and they might start to impact the way that clients start to see you, and they might hold back in ways that Katie's talking about. This allows for them to know that before they invest in that relationship with you and have a better therapy experience, even if it's not with you.
Yeah. And that's why I think it's important to know who your client is. So that was my segue. I think it's really important to know who your client is, have a very clear picture. And I call it the ideal client avatar. I don't know where I got that from. Somebody else. It's from somebody else. But understanding their presenting problems, their challenges, their goals, and all of those things is really important so that you can get to a place where you're speaking to the right people. Because if we spend 80% of the time talking to our ideal client, the people who we serve best, we need to know who they are. So how would they describe themselves? I think the clearest one is folks who might be coming in for disordered eating or eating disorders. They may say eating disorders, but with disordered eating, they may talk about self-esteem issues or body image issues, and they may not connect when you say, I work with disordered eating, for example. So you want to make sure you're using their language to describe it. I think the other thing, and I think this is something where the closer you can get to their worldview in describing how the problem is set and those kinds of things, or how the world looks. And this is something where when they align, I think that's important, right? Like having some alignment in worldview or connection. But I think knowing what worldviews they hold can also frame how you talk about it. For me, I think I recognize that if I've got clients who are burned out and overwhelmed, they're going to see the world as kind of insurmountable. If I start doing some cheerleading around, you can do it all, it's going to be great, they're not going to connect to that. And so it's meeting them where they are and understanding that perspective so you can speak to that perspective rather than the diagnostic or your perception of it. I think where else they have sought help and what else is in their lives is also important, because I think oftentimes if we have time, we can talk about kind of networking and kind of treatment teaming and who you should be talking to. But I think understanding that, for example, for me, my clients have tried a lot of different things. They've seen personal trainers, they've potentially done some, kind of holistic things, and they've potentially been in therapy before and it didn't work for them. And so knowing, kind of their journey to your door is critical so that you can identify how you talk to them, how you speak to them, what you talk about. And I know we've got a couple of things.
And I'm just noticing our time as well, and we've got several more slides that we want to hit on some things. So keep your comments going. Steph and Victoria have some great comments going on over in the chats, and definitely perfect examples of exactly why this works.
Yeah.
To kind of add to what Katie was talking about on the last slide, these are some of the questions that might help you to be able to write some of your copy and put in your videos, as far as, how are they going to describe what's going on for them? How do they normally talk about it? Speak to that pain that they're experiencing and what's at stake for them. So if you can answer these questions, that helps you hit that 80-20 content goal.
And I think being able to do it in their language is the most important thing. I think, and I think some people will speak to, well, but I don't have one ideal client. And I think being able to start with one, and I even say, like, what is your favorite client? The person that you feel the least drained. And I think that's what Steph was talking about. The person that it feels easiest to work with, the people that you want to fill your practice with. It doesn't have to be something in particular, but using their language and identifying common goals, what your clients hope for the future, who do they want to become, how would they describe their own goals? Because I think people in addiction know this well. They're not going to necessarily say, oh, I want to quit. if they're not ready. So I think it's being able to, what do they see as their goals and how would they describe them? And what commonly is getting in the way of them meeting their goals? Because I think that's the reason they're coming to you, is whatever that obstacle is. And so making sure that you've conveyed that, I get you, I see you, I see your goals, I'm using your language, is going to make sure the right people self-select into your practice.
So one of the big issues is how you convey this, but without discriminating and really speaking to ways that harm people. This is being able to talk about how you work and who you work well with, without saying, I don't work with these protected classes. So, I think Victoria's, again, got a great example of this, of, if she conveys herself as, hey, I work from this Christian perspective, perfect, awesome. It conveys who she is, how she works. And it doesn't go so far as to say, I don't work with other faiths. If you come from another faith, don't come to me. Still let people self-select in, but it's drawing that line between welcoming and letting people come in with an informed decision, as opposed to really making it unwelcoming to other people who might seek your services and might make an informed choice to come in, even if they don't agree with you or your worldview, but are still seeing some benefit of working with you. So,
yeah, and I think that's super important.
Steph says, regarding balancing disclosures, she wants to write a book about her life experiences, but hesitated because current or potential clients might have read it and know all this info about her. Our thoughts on it is, the more that you put out in the world in a way of owning it, and a way of owning what your process and your experience has been, if that's the positive aspects of it, that can be incredibly beneficial to a lot of clients. It might make some people self-select out, knowing some certain things about you, or editing out things that they might not present to you. But a great way of looking at this is looking at a lot of Yalom's writings and seeing how some of his clients even talked about, am I important enough to actually be in your office based on having written about clients before? He does it very, very gracefully, and I think that you can point to a number of his, especially later career writings, about this exact question that I think hits it pretty much spot on.
So because we've got 2 minutes, there's some additional ethical guidelines that I think we've talked mostly about. So I think we can move on to the next thing. Basically, I'm gonna run through this quickly, and Kurt will grab some ethics as we go along. But I think kind of what you can do, looking at opportunities to share your brand, networking, and building your plan. I think clearly getting a website and making sure your website reflects you is important. There's a lot of online directories. You can do some social content, whether it's curating your story or kind of sharing your unique voice. I think it's important to make sure that you're very thoughtful about everything that goes out. Permission marketing is also important beyond the scope of this. Don't just put people's emails into your newsletter. They'll just leave that there. And I think networking is really important. And so I'll talk about it for a half a minute. When people start worrying about networking, this is when you do the ideal client work, you know who else is going to be working with your clients, where else they're going to show up. So networking with those people means that you'll have a treatment team. You'll also be able to get clients from people besides therapists, because therapists are your competition. And understanding how the professional circle builds around you. So this is the in-person stuff that includes consultation, collaboration, and community. But the work that you do in developing your website shouldn't just be to your website. It should also be in how you operate everywhere. Okay, so this is the workbook. I guess there was an additional ethics. Sorry, Kurt. Oh, it got pulled over. Can I pull it? Well, anyway, let me go back. How do I go back? So it's brand called you workbook. Apparently the K got pulled over when I changed it to the Google slide, but it's a bit.ly. And so we have a free workbook that goes through it. And so I don't know if you can put that in the chat. Sam, is that what you're doing? Or Kurt's doing it?
I'm working on it, yep.
Yep, yeah, you sure want to link that.
And then, do you have it, Kurt? Should I go to the next one? There we go.
Yeah.
And then The Therapy Reimagine conference, like Sam mentioned, October 17th, we're having a cool VIP reception. Sam, are you going to that, or is it Perry or both of you?
I am not. It is just Perry going. We have to trade off this week because I'm gone the week after at a different conference. So it'll just be him there. But he will be speaking, and I'm definitely looking forward to hearing all about it.
And this is going to tell you how fun it is. It's not just a networking thing. It is the psychosocial.
Proud of that title.
I am so proud of that title, that we are socializing as therapists.
And so we do have the promo code MTSG50, that's all caps, MTSG50, to get $50 off the full conference. You can learn more about the conference, second.therapyreimagineconference.com, but so many things are going to be discussed there. I think Perry's talking about social media. There's, I think one of your common contributors, Katie Reed's going to be talking about using motivational interviewing in a website. Kurt and I are going to do a live podcast. And a lot of the stuff we talk about here, you can find on our, we do episodes on it, mtsgpodcast.com is that. I'm sure Kurt's going to write that in the chat as well. I'm like, Kurt, write it. But we talk about a lot of these things. And we interviewed Perry on the podcast. So, and he talks about SEO on the podcast. So, but it's just going to be hanging out with a lot of folks who are brilliant.
Embracing the spirit of modern therapists and really looking at all of these kinds of things of what it means to be a therapist in the 21st century, having a calling and taking care of yourself on a business level and on a human level as well.
Yeah, so, Joe Muirhead, Tiffany McLean is going to be there. We just got so many cool people.
Awesome. And yeah, for anyone viewing this later, all of the resources that were mentioned by Katie and Kurt, I will put these in the post where you can watch this recording. So all of this stuff will be linked. We would absolutely love to have you attend the Therapy Reimagined conference. I love what Katie and Kurt are doing. They have been just fantastic to work with, and we're huge supporters of sort of the messaging and the information they're providing around what they do at the conference. So thank you both so much for joining us. This was wonderful.
Yeah,
thank you so much, Sam.
I got one more thing. The Fall into Cash. There's a turbocharge your business. It includes a consultation with me and a free ticket to the conference. So if people want to sign up to try to get a free conference ticket and consult with me, then there's that in the Fall into Cash.
And that giveaway is going on actually just until tomorrow. So what I will go ahead and do is I will link that right now for anyone who is still with us. So you can click on that link and register. It's completely free to register. You just need your email address, and then there's ways if you share on social media and stuff like that, you get an additional entry. So Katie and I both put it in the chat there, and would love to have you enter that. It's a totally free ticket to the conference. So we'd love to have you enter the giveaway, as well as a strategy session with Katie here. So
thank you, everyone. Great questions. If you are listening later, come join our Facebook group, ask us questions there. We're both pretty active in the group as well, so we're happy to pop in there. But thank you, Sam. Thank you, Brighter Vision. This was a blast.
I had a great time, and thanks to both of you, and looking forward to having Perry attend the conference, and hope everybody that attended today is able to make it. So
yeah, it'd be awesome.
Awesome.
All right. Take care, everyone. Have a good day. Bye-bye.